Hello Cosplay World. Today we're going to be painting a graphic on a garment without using a stencil. So let's start. First thing you want to do is make sure that your garment is lying completely flat, no wrinkles, no bumps. Get rid of any lint or pet hair or your hair. Use a piece of tape wrapped around your hand or a fabric rolly lint remover thing. I'm using to draw this graphic on a Jelly Roll gel pen, white. I use it to transfer markings on my patterns and stuff like that, so I'm using it here. If you're not as confident, because this is kind of permanent and it doesn't rub off or wash off very well, you can use Taylor's chalk or regular chalk, or I've heard good things about white soap. White soap, of course, washes off if you don't make your marking quite perfectly. I have my reference art on hand. You can see it at the top right, and I marked off the proportions of the garment compared to the reference art, so you definitely want to do that. I'm using a ruler and I'm reinforcing my outlines the way I want it to. This looks a little uneven, but the garment is actually oriented a little uneven to the camera. I didn't notice that while I was filming, but I put down my outlines. I make reference markings using my ruler here, my broken acrylic ruler. I always break my acrylic rulers. I've replaced this one twice and I've just faced up to the fact that it's going to be broken. I can't have a perfectly square ruler. Oh, there's Tochi. So yes, I'm reinforcing my markings and I'm filling in the areas where I actually want paint with a little bit of scribble. Because this is so large and a little bit complex, you definitely want to be able to walk away from this and come back and know where you want paint and where you don't want paint. So it's useful to do something like scribbling the markings. And there's more reference markings, and I'm drawing the, I guess you would call those ribs. Here I'm using a fabric eraser. It didn't work out very well. That's how I knew that this was more permanent. And now I'm starting to paint. I'm using, I believe, a 1/4 inch fabric paintbrush. You can use a regular paintbrush. Either way, you want to keep it clean, because the nature of fabric paint is it doesn't wash off very well once it starts drying. So even if you're not changing colors, you want to keep your brush fairly clean, wash it off every so often. You notice I'm going very slowly, putting down my outlines. That does establish how the rest of your work will go, because if you have a very neat outline when you start, it makes it easier to stay within the lines. You notice I'm also working with paint from a cup. I didn't like how that worked out very well. When I first poured the paint, there was a lot of dripping. I couldn't afford really to have the waste, even though I had stretched the paint, because this is a very good fabric paint and it's kind of expensive. So I got that on my fingers too when I poured it. I didn't like it very well. But yeah, I'm working on this in sections. So when I was working here, I noticed it was a little difficult, and it was going to be very difficult to get out to those far edges, the edges further away from me, without getting my arm in it. Basically, the way I work, I knew I would have put my arm down in it eventually, so I started working on the outer edge. I pinned this down the seam to keep it from rolling over, and I started working on the far edge inward. And when you do that, you want to make sure your paint's dry. So I did come back to this a little later. And when you're working in sections, because it's perfectly okay to do that, just make sure when you join up the sections to keep the paint layers fairly uniform. Let's see. So you notice those scribbles are working out very usefully. Oh yeah, the paint brand I'm using. I'm using Jacquard Neo Opaque. I did wind up stretching that with a little bit of tulip paint, and I know that's not as good a brand. But either way, with either brand, you would have to put down more than one layer. I do recognize that this first layer is going down. It's not very uniform. It's not very opaque, but you're going to have to put down multiple layers anyway. I stretched it probably about 25%. Not a big deal. Let's see. Here's the second layer. It does look pretty awesome, but in person, it doesn't really. It's not truly opaque. It's not the best it could be. So I did wind up using 3 layers. By this point, I had established a pretty comfortable way of working. You notice I am putting my hand down. The paint that I'm putting my hand down on is dry to the touch. But yeah, it's a lot easier to work in the clean outlines that I had already established. So I'm pretty much just painting here. Also, I stopped working with the cup because I wound up wasting a lot of paint while I was waiting for the other paint to dry. And when you're working from the cap, what you do is you put the lid on the cap, shake the paint up, put the lid on the jar, shake the paint up, and then open it. The amount of paint that's in the cap is perfect to work from without the stuff in the jar drying and without what you have in the lid drying. It's a good amount of paint to work with. So I do recommend that if you're working with fabric paint. I'm going back while I'm waiting for this layer to dry and touching up any parts that don't look uniform enough to me as a layer. Also, I didn't work all the way up to the shoulder because while I was working flat on my painting mat, the shoulder portion wouldn't lay flat. I didn't like that very much. So I'm going to work on that later and I'll show you how. Pretty much just kind of everywhere. I got a little excited when I first started working on this, so I was in a hurry to see how it would turn out. I did wind up changing the upper portion, the portion I'm working on close to the armhole. That part that hooked in towards the zipper, it wasn't the right shape to me, so I did wind up changing that. And it was a little bit of a challenge because I had already made such a hard outline that getting it to blend took probably an extra layer of paint, and I had to work really carefully. And it's okay to do that. It's okay to mess up, as long as in the end your layers of paint are uniform. So I'm kind of everywhere again. Let's see. Yep. Just painting a little everywhere, waiting for stuff to dry. And I'm working here around the armhole. I had to work very carefully. I had to pull the edging of the armhole upwards to not get paint under it. I didn't want to get paint, not get paint on it. I didn't want to get paint on it, so I pulled it up so it would be under it. Working on that last rib, and then I picked it up. It has to be perfectly dry before you pick it up. Don't move your work until it's done. So you definitely want to work in a place that you can leave it safely without your little brother sticking his hand in it or something like that. So now to work on the arm section, I have a shop bag, just a regular plastic store bag, that I'm throwing over the edge of an ironing board so that I can form the shoulder seam so it lays flat. So there I am. I'm pinning it down so that it stays flat because the bag was kind of shifting around. I think I actually taped it down later. I don't really show that. But yeah, it's laying nice and flat. This is actually around the neckline. I know you can't tell the difference. This is a hooded sweatshirt, if you don't recognize what I'm working on right now. From this angle, the camera's at a slightly different angle because the ironing board is probably about 4 or 5 inches higher off the mat. It looks really awesome. It's not really much of a difference. I guess it's just the camera angle affecting how the paint goes down, or how it looks when it's going down. I'm working really slowly here because there's a lot of seams I have to work with. There's the neckline seam for the hoodie, there's the shoulder seam, and all that stuff I want to make sure I didn't get paint on. And then closer to the armhole, of course, there's that edging on the sweatshirt. So you got to work really slowly, make sure stuff dries. I think I was showing the jar there and how I was actually using the lid. If you do have to put the lid or your source of paint onto the garment, make sure that you take the paint out very carefully, because if you get those little drops and splatters, it kind of messes up your paint job. If you do happen to get any paint that you don't want, you have to catch that very quickly, so be very careful. But you can keep a wet rag on hand and just basically blot at the paint while it's still wet, because if it dries it's permanent, but it's still usually water soluble and removable while it's wet. So yeah, I'm waiting for the shoulder to dry, and I'm just touching up bits and putting on that third layer of paint, really. Let's see, yeah, that's when I was working on the shoulder, I kept a little piece of like the first layer I probably should have only done like one layer and then did the shoulder thing, but at the time I was trying to figure out what to do. But yeah, I kept the first layer, like a little bit of it, so that I could connect the shoulder layer of paint, and then after that I did the second layer and the third layer. So I finished that. This side I wanted to show that I was working more uniformly. I did put down the first layer of paint. I didn't quite make it to the camera because I didn't know it had turned off by that point. So this is the second layer. It looks pretty awesome going on. You could tell the very obvious difference while I'm working. And that, of course, I have the lid on the garment again. I'm being very careful. Working very slowly, making sure I don't get any paint splotches. If you do happen to get any splotches, if you have a simple color like red or black especially, you can get some matte fabric paint and maybe touch those up a little bit if it's too late and it's already dried. You have to be careful with that though, because cameras are very strange creatures. It might look okay to your eye, and then you catch the wrong light with a photographer taking your picture, and suddenly it's like, what is that weird little spot along the graphic? So you definitely want to be careful with that. But I did happen to clean up my little messes. I made like 2 little mistakes. I used a Deco Art or Deco Fabric paint pen for dark fabrics. It's really awesome. It works really well with the black sweatshirt fabric, and it was really the tiniest of lines along the edge. I'm just super picky about stuff. But yeah, I'm putting down this second layer. I'm still doing that thing where I work from the outside to the inside for that portion of the graphic, because it did turn out to be the most comfortable. And you see how my arms are kind of everywhere. That was because, you know, I can put it anywhere because I waited for the paint to dry. So I'm painting. It looks like this is the third layer, and I'm not sure if you can tell, but if you look on the part like towards the camera beyond my arm and the part I'm actually working on, you can tell that it's a little more opaque than even the second layer. It's good stuff. This neo opaque paint, I think if I had been using Tulip on its own, it would have took about 4 or 5 layers of paint, which is of course more time that it takes to work on it, and more paint that you have to use. So the neo opaque is highly recommended in comparison, and because I'm just super picky, I wanted that opacity to be at its maximum. So yep, I finished this, and I just continued working on the ironing board so I wouldn't have to transition between locations. And you notice the green masking tape I used to actually tape the bag down, because it was kind of shifting and wrinkly, and I wanted it to be smoother when I worked on it. So yep, finishing that up. And you see where I changed the shape of the ribs towards the armhole. I'm not sure if you could tell the difference from last time. And oh, I had the paintbrush in my mouth. That's a really bad habit, and I don't recommend doing that. That's actually how I messed up on the previous panel, because I had my paintbrush in my mouth. I did learn my lesson, but I kept doing it for the second part because it's just a bad habit of mine. But yeah, finishing the painting, and we see the completed garment and how neat the lines are. And that's pretty much it. I hope you like this tutorial, and thanks for watching.
Outro time, cosplay world. Just want to say thanks for everyone who stuck around this far. We really appreciate it. Send us your comments, your concerns, your requests, and your thumbs up. They really do. They really are appreciated, and we really like seeing those in the morning. We also are hoping to get some more subs so that maybe one day we can get the press badges and cut down on the cost for conventions. Maybe even entice some folks to come join us, get some more content. That's about it. I just want to say thanks. See you around next time. Good times to all.